Several months ago, I had the privilege of keynoting a large educational conference in New York. And as part of my duties at this conference, I was to conduct or moderate an exercise called the Fishbowl. And that's when people, and in this case students from various independent schools, get together in a circle and discuss something, but then there's a larger circle around them, comprised of others who are listening to what these students are saying. And those others, in this case, were teachers from various independent schools. Actually, heads of school, to be more precise. So the students in the inner ring, in the fishbowl, being observed, were asked to give us their thoughts about diversity and inclusion and how well or not they figured those efforts were going inside their schools. And I was surprised to hear, for a very significant part of that fishbowl, the emphasis was the lack of diversity of thought in their schools. Various self-described liberal students said, you know, I'm not afraid to speak my mind at my school. I know that I'll be given a hearing. But I don't think conservative kids are given a hearing. Or at least kids who come from conservative families. And I know some of them are afraid to say what they really think or what they truly believe. And some of these students went further. They said, I want them to feel like it's okay to express themselves because I want to learn from them. One said, I don't have all the answers. Another said, I don't have a monopoly on truth. I dare say I hear this more from young people than I do from adults. And it's a lesson worth ingesting for reasons that will be clear in a moment. Well, what I loved about their message was that, first of all, these kids, so-called, were really reimagining the safe space. They didn't want safe spaces to mean, as the media stereotype would have us believe, romper rooms in which they are inoculated from disagreement. That was just a boring space as far as they were concerned. What they meant by safe space was a space that is safe for people to disagree without being immediately judged for it. And ultimately, what I think they were saying is that that is the kind of diversity that leads to unity without uniformity. Individuality without the selfishness of individualism. I would add, it's the kind of diversity that also avoids inflaming the culture wars. Now, why should we care about avoiding the culture wars? Because the stakes are too high not to care. Think about it, and I'm channeling Dr. Zhao here. The generation we're teaching today will be responsible for contributing to, and quite possibly coming up with, enduring solutions to challenges that have by now, thanks to us, become, in some cases, existential. The climate crisis, an era quite possibly of pandemics related to the climate crisis, the unintended consequences of artificial intelligence, automation, mass migration, and the rise of populisms, both right and left. But solutions to any of these can't be sustainable. They can't be enduring if they are imposed. Imposition ripens a society to think of themselves as being humiliated, which only makes it easier for demagogues, right and left, to then instigate backlash. And the problem with that is all we get is the exchange of dogmas. My dogma is better than your dogma. Oh yeah, well, my dogma is better than your dogma. So the needle doesn't move. What moves is the hamster wheel, going round and round and round, with cynicism deepening and the noise amplifying. That's what we need to turn around. And that's why I think the future of education, whatever else it is, must include teaching this generation and teaching ourselves to communicate across lines of disagreement. And that in turn means learning the skills of moral courage. Now, you see how I've defined moral courage: doing the right thing in the face of your fears. I'll get to the bit about the right thing in just a moment. But let me address the fears. Social science research consistently shows that what we human beings fear more than anything else is being judged negatively, being shamed and blamed, being thought weak, ignorant, incorrect in any way. And so most of us will just go with the flow in a desperate bid to belong, without exposing ourselves to different points of view that might clarify whether we are, in fact, doing the right thing. And I'll give you an example of how insidious this tendency is, how it can undermine the integrity, the efforts of even those of us who fancy ourselves enlightened, awake, woke. Follow me back, metaphorically speaking, to the fishbowl. At a certain point in that exercise, one of the students said, you know, in all the years that I've been attending my school, we've not had a teacher with a visible disability. I'd love to have such a teacher at our school because I want to learn about how the world looks through that teacher's eyes. After the fishbowl ended, the first round of it, the students vacated, and then in the inner ring came some of the teachers who were observing them, self-selected group. And they were asked to reflect on what they had just heard from the students. One of the first teachers who spoke wept. She wept. She said, for all the years that I have been attending conferences about diversity and inclusion, I've heard a lot about race. I've heard a fair amount about gender identity. But this is the first time that I have ever heard anybody bring up people with disabilities. And the reason she wept is that it hit home for her. She's the head of a school that serves children with special needs. And that really got me thinking. When we focus on one aspect of diversity and we make it a mantra, we make it our credo to the point where in some cases it becomes dogma, then are we really equipping our own students to pursue justice? Or are we equipping them to pursue just us? The hamster wheel, round and round. This is why I say, folks, that moral courage isn't just for our students. We have to educate ourselves about it. We have to learn how to practice it. We've got to role model it for the kids we're teaching, because they can sniff out our hypocrisy like that. Don't think for a moment they can't. They watch, they learn, and they learn from our example as much as anything that happens at home. People often ask me, but wait a minute, Irshad, can moral courage be taught? I say, you bet it can. Because it's not just a virtue. It is, as I mentioned earlier, a set of skills. And one of my own mentees applied these skills to a situation that she had in her life. This young woman is an opponent of the Confederate flag. Her childhood friend is a supporter of the Confederate flag. But rather than berate him, she decided to invite him to her backyard to sit down over a glass of lemonade and talk. And she asked him, the first question she asked him was this: how does that flag make you feel? Not a gotcha question, not even an intellectual one, a deeply human question. How does it make you feel? And after he replied, he asked her, how does it make you feel? And the conversation began in earnest. And in the course of that conversation, the supporter of the flag realized something. That he actually cared more for his friend than he did about the flag itself. Why? Because unlike any other opponent of the Confederate flag that he had come across, she gave him the respect of engaging with him. And that respect made all the difference. Understand, folks, respect doesn't mean agreeing with. It literally comes from the Latin word respectate, respectate. Look again, dig deeper, ask questions, engage. And what my mentee was really doing in applying the lessons of moral courage, she was mentoring her friend to practice moral courage. The skills, for example, of expressing your curiosity, despite any fear you may have of being deemed stupid for those questions. The skill of engaging your other rather than labeling your other. The skill of taking from disagreement an invitation to further engagement. The skill of knowing when to step back for the sake of humility and not just step up for the sake of honesty. The skill, therefore, of role modeling public listening as much as public speaking. And ultimately, the skill to know when or if to walk away. As I walk away from this stage, I want to just share with you one last thought, which is I want to tell you about a teacher, the teacher, who got me interested in developing my own moral courage muscle. His name was Mr. Goldman, Stan Goldman, my 9th grade English teacher. One afternoon, I walked into Mr. Goldman's English class, and I saw swastikas on the chalkboards. And I saw some of my classmates smirking and giggling. And then I looked again at the chalkboard. Yep, those were swastikas. And then I looked once more at my classmates. Really, what I was doing was buying time to figure out whether I was going to speak up. I didn't. I took my seat and said nothing. Mr. Goldman walked in. He saw what we all saw. His eyes welled up with tears, and he took the brush. He wiped all the swastikas off the board, and he just got on with the English lesson. After class was over, I approached Mr. Goldman. Sorry, I'm a little emotional here. I approached Mr. Goldman to tell him, I'm so sorry that I said nothing. And he said, why should you be sorry? You're not the ones who drew those swastikas, were you? I said, no, sir, I wasn't. He said, then it's not your responsibility. And I said, oh, no. Part of it is my responsibility because I know what those symbols are. I know that's hate. If I didn't know it, well, maybe I could let myself off the hook, because then there would be nothing to have struggled with. But I'm well aware of what that means. And I want to tell you, that's not going to happen again on my watch. I didn't do the right thing. But as Martin Luther King Jr. long ago pointed out, it's never too late to do the right thing this time. And my question for all of you is this. If you were Mr. Goldman, Jewish or not, if you were Mr. Goldman and you walked into that classroom, how would you have expressed your moral courage? How would you have started a conversation that didn't immediately shut down those who needed to learn from this experience? How would you have invited your students to co-create that conversation? You might say, without for a moment trivializing, how would you have gamified moral courage? I thank you for your ears.